Now, there have been some extraordinary scenes at China's ruling Communist Party Congress, with the former Chinese leader Hu Jintao being led out of the closing ceremony in Beijing. As you can see here, Mr. Hu was sitting beside President Xi Jinping in the Great Hall of the People when he was approached by officials who took him by the arm and led him away. It's not clear what was behind the move during what's usually a highly choreographed event.
A man of action, Hu Jintao. In the previous episodes, we learned about China's most prominent leaders who, with their extreme ideologies and charisma, mobilized thousands of the population and radically reshaped China. Although these leaders differed in some aspects of their beliefs and methods, they were loved by the Chinese population, albeit controversially. These leaders were the faces of the communist dream, always visible to the public and either inspiring people or sparking up protests. If these leaders are to grace us with their terrazzo and brass stars on the Walk of Fame, one of them chose not to openly display and brag about it. This leader chose to work often behind the public eye and maintained a low profile throughout his leadership. But one cannot simply say that his rule was not impactful. After all, he was the one who not only kept China afloat during the 2008 financial crisis, but also significantly improved the economy despite it. Behind the shadows of his more prominent predecessors is a leader who is worthy of recognition on his own. This man is Hu Jintao. Born from Taichou in the Jiangsu province, Hu was born to a family of tea merchants who were victims of Mao's Cultural Revolution in 1966 to 1976. Sources have conflicting information about his birth date, but the generally agreed upon date was December 21, 1942. Having lost his mother at the early age of 7, he, along with his siblings, was sent by their father to live with their aunts. Despite this, Hu had a relatively comfortable life when their tea business was still faring well. Hu later left his hometown in 1959 to enter Tsinghua University and study as an engineer majoring in hydropower generation. He graduated in 1964 and thereafter stayed for his postgraduate studies while working as a political instructor. 1966 was a dark time for Hu. For not only was his father's business seized by the government and his father imprisoned, but he was among the intellectuals who were kicked out of their white-collar jobs in the cities to work as manual laborers in the rural areas. However, it seems that Hu did not see this in a bad light, for he himself volunteered to be sent over to one of China's poorest provinces, Gansu. It was there that he jump-started his career. He started helping out in building houses for the Liujia Dam project in 1968 with the Ministry of Water Conservancy. A year later, he relocated to another department within the same ministry, working as a technician and secretary under the number 813 Sub-Bureau. Later on, he transferred to the Ministry of Construction and was moved to the capital of Gansu, Lanzhou, to work as a secretary in the Gansu Provincial Construction Committee. It was there that he caught the attention of its chairman, Song Ping, who happened to be the first party secretary of Gansu and was looking for new youthful cadres for the party. Hu was known to be a hard worker even during his university days. It was there where he first made an impression on Song's wife, Chen Xunyao, who happened to be the university's deputy party secretary. In 1980, Hu was then promoted to vice chairman of the Gansu Provincial Construction Commission. He quickly rose in ranks and was promoted to the deputy secretary of the Gansu Provincial Communist Youth League in the same year. He was then recommended for a training program for young cadres. 2 years after, Hu was recommended to Hu Yaobang, then General Secretary, and made him an alternate member of the CPC Central Committee at the 12th Party Congress in 1982 at only 39 years old, making him the youngest member. He then became the head of the Provincial Communist Youth League in Gansu and months later was promoted to the secretary of the Secretariat of the Communist Youth League Central Committee in Beijing in 1984. Despite being a training ground for young future communist cadres, the Communist Youth League was a bit liberal when it comes to discourse about the economy and social reform. When a movement against the liberalism of the bourgeois spread in China in the 1980s, Hu Yaobang was among those who were criticized, and Hu Jintao readily defended him. This, however, made Hu enemies with the sons of party leaders. Song Ping thought it best for Hu to leave the CYL and be relocated to the province. In 1985, Hu became the party secretary of the province of Guizhou. There he got acquainted with the local farmers, miners, and loggers, and even visited people's homes who expressed their problems to Hu. His leadership in the province showed how Hu was a man of action. He modernized the infrastructure of the province's Guizhou University and made education accessible for the poorest of the poor through tuition waivers. Hu also took attention to the local tea plantation in the province, which has been underperforming, and introduced reforms such as a contract system for workers. However, reformers and those who did not take action against liberal protesters such as Hu Yaobang were criticized by the party hardliners. This led Hu Yaobang to resign forcibly in 1987. Apparently, Hu Jintao's position was also vulnerable. He was once again advised by Song Ping to take up the vacancy of the party's secretary position in the Tibet Autonomous Region to avoid conflict. Yet Hu's actual position was unclear. Although the hardliners suspected him to be a liberal due to his support of Hu Yaobang and his reformist ideals, his imposition of martial law in Tibet to suppress protesters and his open support to the violent Tiananmen Square suppression had certainly shown his loyalty towards the party. In 1992, Song Ping once again recommended him for another office, this time for the Standing Committee of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee. His handling of the Tibet demonstrations also impressed Deng Xiaoping, which led the latter to assign Hu to the organization of the 14th National Party Congress. He was then made an official member of the CPC Central Committee, still being the youngest among the senior cadres. In 1993, Hu took charge of the Central Party School. There, he introduced Western concepts of economics, science and technology, management, and even non-communist military and legal systems. The school went into joint research with well-known Western institutions like Harvard University. These developments have once again planted Hu as a reformer. But unlike Hu Yaobang, Hu Jintao learned that reform could not just happen overnight and involves a gradual process. He was proclaimed vice president in 1998 and openly supported the policies of then-President Jiang Zemin. Although some say that Jiang often assigned controversial jobs to Hu to avoid direct criticism and make the latter take the fall. For instance, Hu's public statements expressed China's anger toward the US over the bombing of the Chinese embassy in Yugoslavia, which Jiang was afraid to do of the reluctance to taint his relations with the US. In 2002, Hu was set to succeed Jiang in the presidential seat and was elected in March 2003 by the National People's Congress. The 1978 Constitution of the People's Republic of China explicitly states that freedom of religion is allowed. However, when certain religions threaten the power of the ruling party, such religions are labeled as cults and are banned by the government. But under Hu's presidency, China had relatively more freedom in practicing their religion and even allow them to publish literature and collect donations. Under his rule, the economy of China had quadrupled. Quality of life improved as more people got wealthier, and this was visible in the whole country. Speed rails, skyscrapers, more cars, and more houses. From where he started as a university student who impressed a party cadre, up until he attained the highest position in the country, Hu remained humble and low-key, leaving China's massive progress to speak for itself. However, Hu was a mysterious man. He certainly was a reformer and a supporter of liberalization even more than his predecessor Jiang. Yet Hu also appeared to be capable of upholding the party's monopoly of power. Unlike his predecessors, Hu was not ideological. He did not have a particular and strong passion for shaping China into a vision of a utopia just like Mao had. His childhood experiences with the Cultural Revolution also did not seem to stir in him a kind of desire for revenge or hate. It's a mystery where Hu stands on both ends of the spectrum. Perhaps Hu stands nowhere between the two. Perhaps that was who he was. His passion was just to see concrete progress in China, rather than a far-fetched radical ideology of liberalism or communism. Hu was a practical man, and he was an example of a leader who did not need charisma to be effective. Stay tuned and thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified of future episodes.